Long before the first American flag was stitched, before the idea of freedom echoed through the colonies, the world was already at war for the land that would become the United States. The story of America didn't begin with 13 colonies. It began with an empire's hunger, a continent's mystery, and a collision of civilizations that changed the course of human history. Chapter 1. A World Before America in the early 15th century. The world was shrinking. Empires stretched their sails across oceans, chasing trade, gold, and power. The Ottoman Empire had closed overland routes to Asia, forcing European nations to seek new paths to the riches of the East. What they found instead was a vast unknown land that would soon become the stage for one of history's most unlikely revolutions. When Christopher Columbus set sail in 1492, he wasn't looking for a new world. He was searching for a shortcut to India, spices, silk, and trade routes. Yet, when his ships reached the islands of the Caribbean, the consequences rippled across the globe. Spain claimed dominion over the New World, unaware that it had triggered a chain of global rivalries that would shape the birth of America centuries later. Spain moved fast. The conquistadors arrived with steel, gunpowder, and the cross. Within decades, the Aztec and Inca empires had fallen. Wealth flowed into Spanish ports, gold, silver, sugar, tobacco, making Spain the richest empire on earth. But such wealth drew envy. England, France, and the Netherlands all watched, hungry for their own share. By the early 1600s, the Atlantic Ocean had become a highway of ambition. European powers established footholds along the American coastlines, each with a different vision. Spain ruled the south and west. France ventured into the north, trading fur and faith with indigenous nations. The Dutch built commerce in the middle colonies. And England, late to the game, planted a small settlement on a mosquito-ridden peninsula called Jamestown, Virginia, in 1607. It was not built on gold. It was built on survival. The English colonists came not as conquerors, but as gamblers. They faced starvation, disease, and war. Of the original 104 settlers, more than half were dead within a year. But those who endured laid the first bricks of a society that would, over time, define itself not by class or birth, but by determination. As England's colonies grew along the eastern seaboard, something unexpected began to happen. While European kings and queens dreamed of profit, the colonists began to dream of independence. Small, quiet dreams that would one day ignite a revolution. Meanwhile, far from the Atlantic coast, the rest of the world was changing. The Enlightenment was reshaping thought in Europe. Philosophers like John Locke and Montesquieu spoke of liberty, natural rights, and the limits of monarchy. These ideas would find fertile ground across the ocean. At the same time, the world's first global war, the 7 Years' War, was about to begin. Though fought on many continents, its outcome would redraw the map of North America and push Britain and its colonies toward a breaking point. By 1750, the American colonies were thriving. 13 small societies linked by trade, language, and a growing sense of identity. They were loyal to the crown, yet they had learned to govern themselves. They had assemblies, militias, and a spirit of enterprise. And then came the spark. The French and British empires collided in the Ohio River Valley, a conflict over territory, trade, and power that would soon engulf the world. The war would give Britain victory, but also debt, resentment, and the arrogance that would cost it its greatest colonies. What no one yet knew was that from this global struggle, a new idea would be born, the idea of America. Chapter 2. The Seeds of Rebellion. The year was 1754. The forests of North America were alive with tension. French soldiers and their native allies moved quietly through the dense wilderness of the Ohio River Valley, claiming the land as part of New France. To the east, British colonists eyed the same territory with ambition and unease. Both empires wanted the same thing: control. Among the first to step into that contested land was a young Virginian named George Washington, only 22, tall and ambitious. Washington carried orders from the Virginia governor to warn the French to leave the territory. It was a mission wrapped in arrogance and naivety. Washington's small force clashed with a French patrol, killing an officer, an act that would echo far beyond the woods of Pennsylvania. The skirmish sparked a war that soon spread across the globe. The 7 Years' War, known in America as the French and Indian War, a global war for an unknown nation from 1756 to 1763. The world's great powers, Britain, France, Spain, and others, fought on nearly every continent. Armies marched through Europe, fleets clashed in the Caribbean and India, and the colonies became both battleground and prize. In North America, Britain poured soldiers and money into defeating France. The colonists fought alongside them, proud to serve the empire. Washington learned the art of war under British generals, watching both their courage and their arrogance. By the war's end, Britain had won a stunning victory. The Treaty of Paris 1763 gave Britain control of Canada and the lands east of the Mississippi River. But victory came at a price. The war had drained the British treasury. The empire's debt had doubled. In London, ministers looked west and decided the colonies should help pay the bill. The price of victory at first. Few colonists complained. They had fought proudly as Englishmen. But when Parliament passed the Stamp Act of 1765, something changed. The law required official stamps paid in British currency on newspapers, legal documents, even playing cards. It wasn't just the cost, it was the principle. For the first time, colonists asked a question that would reshape history. Can a people be taxed by a government in which they have no voice? The phrase spread quickly: no taxation without representation. Protests broke out from Boston to Charleston. Newspapers printed defiant essays. Merchants boycotted British goods. Ordinary men and women, farmers, dock workers, lawyers, joined together in groups, calling themselves the Sons of Liberty. For the first time, resistance began to feel like a shared cause. Across the Atlantic, Britain underestimated the fury it had awakened. Parliament repealed the Stamp Act, but replaced it with new taxes on glass, tea, paper, and paint through the Townshend Acts. It was less about money now, more about authority. The message was clear. Parliament ruled the colonies. The colonies thought otherwise. The world watchers the rebellion brewing in America did not go unnoticed. European powers, especially France and Spain, watched with quiet interest. Both had lost much to Britain in the last war. A divided empire, they knew, was a weaker one, but open support for the colonies would have to wait. For now, the conflict played out in city streets. In 1770, a confrontation in Boston turned deadly. British soldiers, harassed by a crowd of angry colonists, opened fire, killing 5 men. It became known as the Boston Massacre, a name that burned its way into colonial memory. Artists like Paul Revere turned the event into propaganda, etching images of redcoats firing on defenseless patriots. The truth was more complex, but the effect was electric. Across the colonies, anger hardened into purpose. The spark of revolution in 1773, Britain passed the Tea Act, giving the struggling East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in America. It was meant to save a company. Instead, it pushed a movement to the edge. On a cold December night in Boston, a group of colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded 3 ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the harbor. The act was both protest and declaration, a message that the colonies would no longer be silent. London's response was swift and merciless. The coercive acts, called the Intolerable Acts in America, closed Boston's port, dissolved local government, and allowed British soldiers to be quartered in private homes. What had once been scattered protests now became a unified resistance. In 1774, colonial leaders gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. They were merchants, farmers, lawyers, and veterans. Different men with one growing idea: the right to govern themselves. They sent a petition to King George III, pledging loyalty but demanding freedom from oppressive laws. The king ignored it. Instead, he sent more troops. As 1775 dawned, both sides were preparing for war, though neither would admit it. British General Thomas Gage moved to seize colonial weapons stored in Concord, Massachusetts. On the night of April 18th, patriots Paul Revere and William Dawes rode through the countryside with a warning: the British are coming. At dawn, redcoats met armed colonists on the green of Lexington. No one knows who fired the first shot, but when it rang out, it became known as the shot heard round the world. The American Revolution had begun.